This happened in 1999, when I was a sophomore in high school and 14 years old. I had just moved back to America from the Middle East, where I'd spent about 5 or 6 years. Because of the standard of dress there, and the fact that my old school had uniforms, and I had no social life, I didn't own a t-shirt, let alone a pair of jeans. Every day I went to school wearing a long dress or a long skirt with my mousy blonde hair tied back with a scarf used like a headband, as opposed to a headscarf. I never did that, except for out of respect for my host country on religious holidays. I was awkward, mousy, and had a hard time making friends. This was a few years before 9/11, but in my little town there was still animosity towards anyone different. And with my British English accent and the fact of where I grew up, I was pretty different. I really only had 3 friends: Tom, Nathan, and Kenny. Tom lived on my bus route, though he was way out in the middle of the country, so he and his 2 younger brothers were always the first on the bus in the morning and the last off the bus in the evening. Our day always followed the same schedule. I'd get on the bus, go sit next to Tom. We'd talk a little bit until we got to school. Then we'd hang out with Nathan and Kenny for a bit and go to our separate classes. I was in the advanced placement classes, and they were in the regular ones, so I didn't share any with them. But every other day our lunches coincided, so the 4 of us would get to eat together. Then in the evenings, Kenny and Nathan would get picked up, and Tom and I would take the bus home. I don't really remember how we started dating. I think Tom told me that he liked me, and then I said I liked him back. And then our routine would change ever so slightly, in that we'd hold hands on the bus and at lunch while Kenny and Nathan teased us relentlessly. It was so innocent, even for 14. Tom was sweet and thoughtful and completely non-threatening. He was the type to always make sure you had the better half of something, always the first to offer his coat when you were cold, and always pulling out chairs and holding open doors. A real gentleman, which of course Kenny and Nathan teased incessantly. This went on for a few weeks, though it stayed strictly at school. We weren't able to see each other outside of school because he always had to go straight home, where his mother would be furious. Sometimes he would come to school with bruises, but he always said it was from roughhousing with his brothers. I didn't have any reason to doubt him. Then one day there was an upcoming half day from school. Tom suggested he come over to my place, and we could have our first afternoon together. We were both so excited. He would take the bus to my stop, and then either walk or my parents would drive him home later. It was going to be great, and I was beside myself with excitement. Everything went smoothly until the actual day of the half day. One of his brothers had found out about his plan and told his mother. She in turn called up to the school, apparently shrieking like a banshee, and demanding that he come home not a minute late, or he'd be in for a world of hurt. He told me at my stop that he would go home, talk to her, and then get back as soon as he could, even if he had to walk. I was worried, but he kissed my cheek and said everything would be fine, and he'd be there in an hour or so. So I went inside and waited and waited, and when I got tired of waiting inside, I went out with my dog and waited and waited. I had thought about calling him, but the one time I tried, his mother had spewed such venom at me for daring to call her house that the idea made me cringe internally. So I just waited. Eventually the sun went down, but he never showed up and he never called. I was disappointed, but I decided it was probably for the best and went about my evening as usual. The next morning, when I got on the bus for school, the bus driver, a middle-aged woman with really pretty graying hair, looked at me and suddenly started sobbing. I thought that was odd, but it was kind of a dreary day in general, so maybe I was reading too much into it. I started heading for the back of the bus and noticed that Tom wasn't there. Neither were his 2 brothers. That was odd. I started to get worried, but I just thought that their mother had taken them to school herself that day. The bus route went along as normal for a while, until we came to a section of heavily forested area where the driver pulled over. She was shaking and crying and just not acting like herself. Almost immediately, I look out the window and see 3 policemen walking up to the bus. She talked to them for a minute, and then one leads her off, another takes the wheel, and the 3rd one comes and sits by me. Neat. I get to sit next to an officer. and then I thought I was in trouble, especially since there were so many other open seats. But he was very friendly, and we chatted about school and life until we got to the campus. Then both remaining officers followed us inside and went to the office. I went to meet up with the boys where I usually did. Tom wasn't there either. Neither of them had seen him, but we just hoped he was okay and went about our morning. In first period, I received a page to come to the office immediately. I thought this was about some scholarships I had been working on, but I thought it was weird that they'd pull me out of class. When I got there, the principal, the counselor, and the police were all there. I suddenly felt like a caged rabbit. And then they told me what happened. The night before, when Tom had gotten home, he had told his mother that he was going to come see me, and that was final. Obviously, it was very much not final. They argued about it. She grounded him, and it came to blows. I found out later that his mother had been very abusive to him, which doesn't excuse what happened, but it does add some understanding. At least to me. After the confrontation was over, he laid in bed all night, planning what he would do. He decided he was going to wait for his brothers to go to the school bus and hang back, telling them he would drive himself to school, which wasn't too far out of the ordinary. Once they were gone, he would take the butcher knife from the kitchen and finish his argument with his mother once and for all. The next morning, everything went as planned for the most part. He got his brothers up and dressed and out for school, and watched until they were at the end of the long driveway to wait for the bus. Then, while his mother was sleeping, he went into her room and stabbed her multiple times. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, the gloomy weather was causing troubles with the bus. I don't know the details, but I know that it was a few minutes late, starting its route. One thing I realized while writing this, and that's something Hollywood seems to miss half of the time, when you stab someone while they're sleeping, they tend to wake up. And she did. She screamed and tried to fight back, but he was too determined and too strong. Since the bus was running late, the brothers were still standing on the side of the road waiting when they heard the screaming. They both turned and ran back to try and help. They tried to defend their mother, but Tom turned on them, slicing one of them across the palms, the other one in the gut. Then he ran. When the bus arrived, she saw one of the brothers staggering up the driveway, covered in blood. In her panic, she kept going and called the police. Eventually, he made it to a corner store a little ways away. Some stories say it was the stabbed brother, and that he crawled there. But I can't confirm that, nor do I really want to. After the police finished questioning me, I was sent home. I remember lying on my parents' bed, staring at the TV while the live coverage of his capture played. Or maybe it was a repeat. I don't know. But I remember seeing the news chopper filming as the police helicopter followed after Tom as he ran across a field. There was a cop perched out the door and braced on one of the landing strut things. And as the chopper got lower, he jumped out and tackled him. And that was the last time I ever saw Tom. The part that creeps me out is what happened afterwards. He pled guilty and was sentenced to 40 years for murder and 20 for the assault on his brother, though they're being served at the same time apparently. Not long after, the letters started. I never kept any. They were long, crazy, rambling things about how we'd be together forever, how he did it for me, how he truly loved me, and he would do anything to be with me. No regret, no remorse, He was happy about what he did, if it meant I was his. We moved a little while later, and the letters stopped. I'm happily married now, getting on with my own life, but every time I think about him, I remember that he's up for parole in 2020. And what happens when he gets out? What happens if he comes looking for me? The best case scenario, he realizes I've moved on, and we part amicably. But the worst case keeps me up at night. This is a true and verified story, although the submitter has asked to remain anonymous, and facts of the story, such as names, have been changed. This is a terrifying but true story that happened when I was just 12 years old. I had moved to my dad's when I was 10, and I didn't know anyone in the area except for the family my dad was friends with. It was a single mom with 3 kids. Luckily, there was a girl a couple years older than me, 12 at the time I met her. We weren't close, but we ended up having the same friends, and we got to know each other a little over the years. One night, our mutual friend Rob was hanging out with her and her younger brother. They happened to be in the house alone because my friend's mom was at work, which is where this gets terrifying and sad. Her mother had been helping a lady through her work. She had gotten to know her fairly well and had learned that this woman's sister was in a mental institution but had recently been let out. The night Rob was hanging out with them, they got a knock on the door. My friend thought it was just her mom because she knocks a certain way when coming in, so she answered it without thinking. Rob wasn't supposed to be there and took off through the window to his house down the road. He never thought twice about it. It was not her mom. It was the sister of the lady her mom was helping. She figured out through talking to her sister where her family lived and her mom's work schedule. She came in, and from this point on is where I don't know the details, and I'm glad I don't. My friend's younger brother got away to the neighbors to call the police, but it was too late. The lady brutally murdered my friend a week before Christmas, decapitated her, and left her body naked in the tub, and then hid her head. They had to look through the presents, and I don't know where they found it, but they did. I wasn't allowed to go to the funeral.